I'm delighted to be here today with Sonia Perez. She was the acting CEO and is currently the COO at UnidosUS. Their mission is to empower Latinos to achieve their own American dream, where their economic, political, and social advancement is a reality. She spent a whopping 3 decades at Unidos, and she's held so many different roles. She's done research roles looking at Latino social policy, demographic issues. She launched Kids Count, which is a Puerto Rican project, which published the first data book on children data in Puerto Rico. And she's been on many boards, including currently being a member of the Coca-Cola Hispanic Advisory Council. Sonia went to Brown, then she got a master's of public education from the John F. Kennedy School at Harvard, and she is fantastic, connected through Renata Soto, who we featured earlier. So Sonia, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Analiza. It's really great to be able to chat with you.
Sonia, I'd love to talk about your upbringing and how you came to being at Unidos. How does your identity shape that career path, especially being here for 3 decades?
Long time. So I grew up in the housing projects in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which is a very different neighborhood today. But when I grew up there, it was mostly Puerto Rican, mostly low income, and not the most desirable place for many people, as many people would see it. But I always sort of saw around me some of the what I would call today inequities. Of course, that wasn't a word I knew then, but just how hard my parents worked, how much we had to struggle for different opportunities. And so that was always in my mind. But I would say that there was a turning point for me. Actually, once I graduated from college, I learned that a friend who had gone to middle school with was killed in a drug situation, and mistakenly. And it really made me think about how was it that I was 22, had just graduated from Brown, was starting my first job in the private sector. And then I find out that someone who grew up exactly like I did wound up in that situation. And so it just made me think about what was I doing with my life and what was I going to do with my life. And I realized that that I needed to go back to graduate school and just really think about policy and public policy and education, because for me, education was the way that got me to where it was. And so, it's a sort of a thread through my life that I knew that I was getting opportunities that other people equally like me, my family, my friends, were not getting, and I didn't know why. And so I wanted to change that.
So the pivot then, Sonia, from working in a corporate job, going to Harvard, the Kennedy School, and then focusing on education, what made it policy? Why did you think that was the ingredient? Education is such a big umbrella of a term. What specifically did you think were the levers? Was it policy and that's what led you then to Unidos?
Yeah, this is a good question because I had never even taken a political science course in college. But I started to think about service and public service, which is why the Kennedy School spoke to me. The idea that we're here to serve in different capacities, and that for me, the policy piece was that it was going to be big, that it wasn't just like one program, one neighborhood, but really that we needed to think about policy and where were the opportunities for Latino students, for English learners, for immigrant kids, for low-income families, like where were those educational opportunities? And we needed to structure society in such a way that it provided it. That was my thinking, right? That we shouldn't be pushing kids into vocational education at that time, which is what I felt like that was happening to the students that didn't go to college prep high schools, and most of us did not. I was lucky to do that, but those, for me, I felt like the high school moment really changed my trajectory. And yet 98% of the students that I went to school with in middle school did not get that kind of opportunity. So that's why I really zeroed in on education. I thought that has to be a path, but it has to be big. It just can't be in one neighborhood, one program.
I'm hearing you say, Sonia, that your past informed each step, even that this terrible trauma that happened at 22. I'm sorry about your friend. That informed then your focus on let's try to do this for more people through policy, specifically in education. And so I'm curious about this concept of the American dream because in the mission statement for Unidos, it says it's for Latinos and their American dream. And so can you talk about what does that mean? Because there's all this heaviness with American dream. Is it true or not? And then you in UnidosUS in the mission mention it's their American dream. Can you share more?
Yeah, I think obviously everybody defines it differently, but this idea of for me, it's about opportunity. It's really about American dream is about opportunity. Is it opportunity in education? Is it opportunity to own a home? For my parents, for example, that would have been the American dream for my father to be able to buy a house and have a house. That was his version of that, and we didn't quite get there, but that was his version. For me, it was about opportunity, about having the choice, really the choice to say, I want to go to this school, I want to try for this job, I want to have those paths open to me. And I think that that's what we all want, equally, right? In every community, and everybody deserves that. You work, you have these paths open to you. There shouldn't be those limitations, and I think that that idea of opportunity is what resonates most for me.
When you think, Sonia, to this belief and opportunity and just other beliefs that you've had, we call it myths, these myths that we thought were true, but then when we actually lived and made these career changes or sought opportunities, it actually ended up not being true. What comes up for you, Sonia, in terms of myths and what you realize were actually false?
I think I'd start just with my family and thinking that I grew up the youngest of eight. My parents came from Puerto Rico, and my father worked in a factory. My mother was home until I was about six, and then she went to work, which was a huge thing in my family because women didn't go outside of the house to work at that time. And one thing I think was that they were really just looking for stability and security. And so anything that pushed outside of that for them was like scary or not right. Or so even my desire to go away to college created a huge shift for my family because my parents, particularly my father, didn't think it was appropriate for a girl to go away to college. And so I think some of the myths for me, or there were limitations that we should stay within our circle, that we shouldn't, even when I went to Harvard, at one point, my mother said something about, you're moving into another social class. And there were all of these class dynamics going on in our household growing up. Of course, we were all in, this working class, lower income class. And the idea that I was now at Harvard and I was being exposed to other people and I was going to take another kind of job that was going to take me in a different direction, I think was very scary for them. And it was, even though it was like an amazing opportunity and I know that they were proud, it also was like, wait, that's not really for us. So I feel like I'm constantly challenging in my family, but also, among other Latino families, I see where the kids, like, we can't let the kid go away to school. We can't let, you have to push and say, why not? That is for us too. So I think there's a myth about how, there's certain things for certain people and certain things for us. And that is something that I've certainly encountered in my life and something I've been trying to push up against.
Can we get specific, Sonia? Because it's so poignant. I'm resonating with that example myself. I got into Stanford, and I remember in the living room, my parents looking at the tuition
Yeah.
and saying to me, you know what a good idea would be? We know you worked hard, but how about community college?
Yeah.
I think that would be great. And then you do that for 2 years, we save more money, and then you find another school. A lot of other people have done that. This school maybe is not for you. And so that resonates in terms of your own the experience you shared with us. But I'm curious for you in those moments, because I was crying as I did that many years ago. What did it look like to push back? What did you need to do? If you look back and you're like, this is not the first time, and maybe you continue to do it today, as you share with other families who have this mindset of that's outside the box. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be with our own people. what advice would you give someone who said, I love my family, I respect my family, I want something different, and yet this is so challenging to push back on people I love. What could you share from your own example, how you've gone about doing it so that we can learn as well about how to apply it in our own lives?
Well, I think at least for me, my family is super important, and I always felt like I could have both. I never
Mm,
thought about I'm going away to school and now I'm starting a different life away from them. I
mm,
just thought I'm going away to school and then I'm going to come back. And so I think I had to deal with a lot of, particularly with my father, his resistance to this. And honestly, the summer before I went away to school, he didn't speak to me for the entire summer. So the entire summer I would come home from work and he would be there and he would not speak to me. And we just kind of coexisted. But the Labor Day weekend before I was leaving for Brown, he came in, and as I was packing and my mother was helping me, and said, basically, you're always going to have this, remember that this is always your house. And, esta siempre es tu casa, siempre puede venir para acá. And so I felt like for my father, who was not at all expressive, was huge for him to do that. But for me, it was, I didn't think that I was doing anything wrong. And so I felt like I am going to balance as much as I can with wanting to do what I want to do, but also staying connected to my family.
mm.
Um, and I think that, I didn't come back after college to New York right away. In fact, I left for 20 years and then came back to New York, but I came back to care for my mom, in part, to be with my parents. And then once my father passed away, my mom came and moved in with us. And so for me, that was always clear that it was like, I want these things for myself, but my family is my anchor and it is my priority, and it's my value, the value to care for my parents and to care for my family, as I was also, getting successful and doing other things for myself.
I'm hearing from you, Sonia, that we can have both. We
Yeah.
can pursue opportunity, open new doors, do new things, and also show respect and love to
Yes.
people that dear to us.
Yes.
And that looks like staying grounded in this vision for our future while knowing that we'll always hold them close. And maybe it's not going to be close for a few years, but we'll eventually get there. And in your case, like your mom lives with you. So that's a testament to that's always been in your heart. I love that so much. So, yeah, I want to talk about your 30-year career at Unidos because that is long.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, as someone who also I got my MBA, we're doing a real round of updates from friends, and everybody gave updates. Like, I've had 2 jobs, 3 jobs, four, I mean, so many different pivots. And I think among us there was one who had stayed. So it's so rare, and to have it for 30 years. My parents stayed in the military with my dad, and then my mom for over 30 years as a nurse. And I'm curious, for you, as you think about your career, and it's never to regret it, but always to just share, how did you decide did you have a plan? I'd stay here for this many years.
No.
I'm sure other people asked you to come work with them. How did you decide, I'm going to stay? This is my path. I'm going to be here. And then it
Mhm.
ends up being 30 years. Can you talk
Yeah.
about that? This
Yeah,
loyalty.
it is a very long time. And no, I definitely did not come in thinking I was going to stay this long. I have held probably about 10 different jobs in that time. So
Mhm.
part of it is that it's, the organization itself, Unidos, is constantly evolving. It's grown. It's complex. I'm learning all the time. It's fun. It's continues to drive my passion. And so I feel very, very lucky to be here and in this role. But I also, along the way, there were some challenges, right? I probably 3 or 4 years into working, I worked in Washington, D.C. on the policy side of Unidos, then National Council of La Raza. And I did get an offer to work in the federal government at the time with a former professor. who from the Kennedy School working on social policy, and I was really, really close to taking it. And then I stopped to think about why that would be. I remember very clearly, it was kind of agonizing, but I stopped to think about why was that being viewed as such a tremendous opportunity to go work there and not staying in Unidos, which at the time was like 40 people in a small, right, National Council of La Raza. And I thought our organizations and the nonprofit sector should be equally seen as something valuable. Like, why is this not being seen as prestigious and that is being seen as prestigious? And I thought, I think I can do what I want to do. I want to do it in this sphere and not over there. And so I turned it down. But he was not very happy. The person who offered me the job, because I was very close to it. But it was a pivotal moment for me to say, how am I choosing, this path? Why am I choosing this path? Like, I have to be really intentional. And then the other was, I then left maybe 3 or 4 years after that I left Unidos for a short time, maybe 2 years, to move to Puerto Rico to take care of my mother-in-law who was sick. And we just quit our jobs, moved from Washington to Puerto Rico and to take care of her. And so I worked in a different, with a housing organization there at the time. But when I realized that was more kind of direct service and working with resident councils and housing projects in Puerto Rico, it was probably the hardest job I've ever had. I realized too that my strengths were in kind of a more behind the scenes, national level research, right? Sort of a different kind of view of work than doing direct service. That was not where my strengths lay. And so I then made the choice to, return to Unidos. I contact them and say, can I come back to my role, but from Puerto Rico? So I was doing remote work before it was a thing. I did have to push to challenge them to let me try to do it that way. And it did work. And honestly, for the, 15 years after that, I was remote. I was never back in Washington, and now I'm in New York. So, and everybody's remote now, right? So, but so that was I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to push and ask and say, let's try this. Let's see how it works. But also recognizing that I wanted to do that work again, because that's where I felt like my skills were really best suited. So, and then I guess the other thing for me that has defined my time at Unidos, and I talk about this a lot with staff, is being open to opportunities that come before you. I think we come in, certainly those of us who study whatever you study, right? You come in thinking this is what I want to do. And I never thought I don't even know what a COO was. I was not interested in like this administrative I wanted to do policy. I wanted to do education policy. The opportunity came up for me to do program work, to work with our affiliate network of community organizations. I didn't necessarily want to do that, but I felt like I was being recognized, my skills were being recognized to be applied in a different place in the organization. And my previous boss said to us, or previous president of Unidos said one time, we have to think about where the community needs us. Where does the community need your skills, and how can you best serve? And that has stayed with me, because it's not always where we want to be. It may be that it's in another place, but we're really doing the work that's going to have the biggest impact in that other place. And that guides me. That kind of philosophy about where do you serve and where do you best serve is really what has led me to take different roles, not always the ones I wanted. But then I see that I've been able to thrive and grow and really learn a lot. And that, that's sort of what has kept me here for so long.
There's a myth, I think, Sonia, when I listen to you, that our careers are one tracked. Here we go. We're going to be able to go direct into the dream job. When in reality, life happens. And when we're intentional about pausing and making sure that our choice is aligned with our values, it helps to both be grounded, but also be open. There's a balance, knowing what you know, but also being open to what you don't know. And what's fantastic about your career is that within one organization, and you obviously did a great job, that people were looking out for you and offering you new opportunities, that there was room to continue to grow and that you didn't get stuck anywhere, and that your openness to taking on positions that weren't necessarily part of the plan has actually, I think, led you to being in a role where it does require a very broad view of an organization to see the research, the direct service, the partnerships, the finance, all of those things. Your specific examples through your career actually positioned you for this role. And had you been really focused on just ed policy and research, I'm not sure you'd be the strong leader you are today. So I want to name that. And that actually brings me to Sonia, just talking about you being the interim CEO for 4 months. And I'm curious about that experience. What did you learn going from, because you said, I'm a behind the scenes person, I know what I'm good at. And I haven't heard you say, like, I like being out in front, I like being the face. That hasn't yet come up. So talk about what that was like for you, and particularly what was surprising.
Yeah, first of all, I felt like if anybody was prepared, I did recognize I was extremely prepared. And so I had to recognize that in myself, right? I had to say, don't doubt yourself. Like if anybody's prepared, you know, this organization inside out, it's you, right? Nevertheless, it's very different to do the behind the scenes internal work and the other, right? And when I was in the policy, on the policy side for 5 years, I did do a lot of the external in terms of interviews and, you know, getting our policy work out there, research out there, but it had been a very long time. So also we're a very different organization and the expectations are different. So I will say that you know, both having the extreme support of Janet and her and the prep that we did, right? That just months and months of preparation with her and other colleagues to get to her taking a sabbatical and me stepping into the role. Our board chair and our board in general are also extremely supportive every step of the way. So I felt like I wasn't alone. You know, I felt like there's a community here with me. And I also felt a tremendous responsibility to do the best that I could do. Like, this is important. This is important work. We are the voice for the Latino community, and I just have to step in there. So I felt surprisingly calm about it. To be honest, I thought I would be a little more stressed out than I was. But I also felt like, yeah, I had to step out there doing a press conference or doing speaking at, you know, at an event or those kinds of things that are not my priority, like not my top choice of things to do. But I knew that I could do them. And so part of it was just like, okay, I'm as prepared as I can be. I have to just jump in and go there. I think you know, some of what I learned is this is a really complicated job. It's really, really hard. And there was also some other, you know, other challenges to the organization internally, people, you know, doing searches for different positions, et cetera. So I never felt like I was 100% in the external role in exactly the same way that, for example, Janet is currently. I was trying to keep an eye internally and keep an eye externally. And I think that, you know, that's sort of reinforced to me the need for two different roles for this type of an organization because it is so complicated.
I am listening to these themes of how you stepped into this role. There is no one more prepared than you to step into this role. So there's this confidence that I'm as ready as I can be. So I hear that. And then I also hear that there was this preparation and support and community, not just before, but during, that you could lean on. And I'm hearing that there was the sense of responsibility to do this external work, which maybe not your favorite, but to do it really well, and to come back to also your strength of looking at what's behind the scenes in the organization. So both balancing things that maybe you're not bring you as much energy to those things that you naturally lean on. So I'm curious, Sonia, because it's such an external role, would you ever think about if she said, and hopefully this doesn't happen, but Janet said to you, actually, I want to go on a year-long sabbatical or two, or maybe I'm going to transition to this other impactful, you know, Latino commission, and would you just run it? So I'm curious about just taking on that role, either at UnidosUS or just in generally an organization. Like, how would you feel about Yeah, I am a CEO. That sounds fun.
Yeah, I guess I will never say don't, what is it? You never say no, that you're not going to do something, but I don't think it's my certainly not my goal at the moment. And I do think that I think that there's space. As I think more, I'm getting older. I've had this 30-year career. What I think is really important is helping to bring along the next generation of leadership. I really do like and I also value. I don't think I had a lot of mentorship, honestly, and so I'm very, mindful that when I recognize talent in young people and younger people, Latinas and others, that I want to support their growth. And I do feel like also we are a young community, that we continue to lift other people up. And so I feel like that's where my next kind of steps are. Not necessarily stepping into the lead role wherever. Maybe I will at some point. I don't know, but really where I want to put my energy is helping to develop that next level of leadership. And because I do think it's really important to ground new leaders and younger leaders, particularly for UnidosUS and the Latino community, in the values of our organization, right? In the values of, we have this amazing 50-plus-year history as a Latino civil rights organization. All that was done in the decades before I got to UnidosUS and the sacrifices that people made to create this organization that is super well respected now. But being that voice, like when I think about, is it hard for me to step into a press conference or step into a speaking role that I may not necessarily, again, not my favorite thing to do. I think about my parents and the harder things they had to do, or I think about the previous leaders of UnidosUS who had to step into these rooms and really push to get the voice of the Latino community out there. So I feel like I can be that bridge of what I heard from them, what I learned from them to the next generation of leaders that are coming now, and have folks today understand we've got to root ourselves in our history, not just our own personal history, but our organizational history, our community history, particularly in this country, and get strength from that to be able to push forward on whatever the next challenges are coming our way.
Mm. There's a rooting of what's happened and the acknowledgement and respect and gratitude for people who've come before us and all that sacrifice, including your parents and organizations and the movement, civil rights leaders. And there's also for you to play that role and allow space and opportunity, grooming, development for the next generation. And I'm also hearing from you too, Sonia, that it doesn't have to be you that becomes the next leader, that you're going to open space for other people to take that helm.
I would add just two other things. In terms of career and development and leadership, I think it's important. I feel like it's important to say, yes, follow wherever the opportunities are, but also that the bumps along the way, and for me, there were these bumps of, having to move to Puerto Rico, take care of my family, do those things, which I believe UnidosUS allowed me to do both. Another reason why I have stayed so long, but also that there were some moments where I did not get recognized. I did not get the promotion that I thought I should get. And those were really, really hard moments for me. And I had to make a choice. Am I going to stay here? Even though I don't think that was right, or I felt like this could have been done differently, I did choose to stay. So I think sometimes you have to, in whatever career you're in, reflect on, is this the place where you can do the best work, or is this really aligned with your values and your passion? And for me, the answer was yes, and that's why I stayed, and I got through those kind of hard moments. The other is the idea about leadership and style, and I feel like we often really value or look for people that are charismatic and out there and aggressive, but there are different styles of leadership. And for me, that is something also that I've learned, that the values that I bring of what I value in terms of humility, in terms of not always being in the spotlight, of, other things like that, doesn't mean you're not a leader. It just means you're a different leader. And this kind of quiet leadership of like, this is how I'm going to move something along. can be as effective. And it just depends in the moment, or it depends on the organization. But I think it's important for young women in particular, I think, to understand and recognize that there are different kinds of leadership, and we can just be true to who we are and what's comfortable for us as we move forward in our careers.
I want to stay with that point in terms of leadership styles, that there are many different ways to lead that are effective, even more effective than the typical charismatic, whatever the other sort of more white male dominant picture style of a leader. Can you talk to us about any specific moments, Sonia, when you maybe questioned, should I lead a certain way that is less my style, and then you ended up leaning more into who you are authentically, even though it wasn't sort of typical? Do you have any moments that come up for you that bring this to life?
I think I guess I would say, just even in this recent interim CEO period, right, that I am I had to do a press conference or a press event with Representative Castro, and it was like the first week of the sabbatical of my role here, and I thought, okay, well, I'm not in Washington D.C. anymore. People don't really know who I am because I've been behind the scenes, and I realized that I had to, and we were talking about the lack of representation of Latinos in the media. But this is work that UnidosUS started like 30 years ago. And I was there at our press conference 30 years ago when we did that first report. And I had to think about drawing on that. So like pushing into this space where it was not clear. I sort of sensed that the expectations were not clear about how I was going to do in this event. And also because I hadn't done something like this in a really long time. And I actually like channeled my father's indignation about how we are not seen. He used to talk about that. How come there's not Latinos in the TV shows and things like that, right? And I went in there with that, but also with that history that, hey, I was at that first press conference 30 years ago talking, and those were the kinds of remarks that I made. And so I heard from many that my remarks were really forceful, were really effective, that I did a good job. But it was, in the moment, I really did have to think about, how am I going to come off in this thing? Because my style is not to just like get out there. And I just thought in my own head about, okay, these are the kinds of things I want to say. I'm just going to say them. And that was important for me to start like, okay, this is my style. This is how I'm going to say it. And how it's received is another thing, but I can't control that.
What a beautiful example, especially when you draw upon your father and you draw upon 30 years ago when you were at this press conference, and to stand in your truth and to deliver in a way that felt like it was you versus some other persona. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
All right, with that, ready for lightning round?
Sure.
Okay. Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate.
Cooking or take out?
Cooking.
Climb a mountain or jump from a plane?
No, climb a mountain for sure.
Have you ever worn socks with sandals?
Yes.
How would you rate your karaoke skills on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being Mariah Carey?
Probably 3, but the enthusiasm of a 9.
What's a recent book you read?
Under the White Gaze.
What's a favorite way to practice self-care?
Being actually cooking, baking, being by myself.
What's a good professional development you've done?
The Rockwood leadership, leading from the inside out.
What's your definition of a boss mama?
I think leading with values and just being grounded in who you are.
What advice would you give your younger self?
To not be so intimidated all the time and just step into the spaces. Yeah.
And then where can we find you, like LinkedIn or anywhere else?
UnidosUS website and on LinkedIn. Yes, I'm on LinkedIn.
And last question, do you have a final ask, recommendation, or any parting thoughts to share?
Just that I do really appreciate, Analiza, this opportunity. I think it is really important to hear our voices and to tell our stories. I also wish I had this many years ago, and that our stories are valid, right? Our experiences are valid, and we don't always hear them, or we're afraid to share them, even though, like, I realized some of the things I said to you resonated with you, and I don't know that I've shared all these things before. So, so thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.